Oh, cheers. It's always hard to know whether you should be applauding at the beginning or not, right? You have a much better idea once the thing's over. Wow, those lights are bright. Okay, so my name's Jeff Campbell, and this talk is, you can leave that down if you want to. People can have a nap if they think it's boring. I'm hoping not, but this talk is called Actionable Agile Tools, and as the title suggests, it's a very actionable talk. It has very specific things. I'll get into the why I think this is a good talk to do in just a minute. Spoiler alert, the big why is because I have a book called Actionable Agile Tools, so for me it's a very good talk to do. I don't want to waste a ton of time convincing you that I'm qualified to be up here and spend all my time talking about myself. Oh, right. No, sorry, I forgot to mention. I hate going before lunch because now all of you are starting to get hungry and want to get out of here. So I'm going to do my very best to get us finished early. It'll give us lots of time for questions. I can't promise it, but I'm going to do my very best. So because of that, I don't want to waste a bunch of time telling you about myself. So let's just make an agreement so that we all know that I'm qualified to be here. Let's just agree here as a group that I'm fantastic and I'm very well qualified to be up here. Yeah? Excellent. Thank you. So the only two other things that I'm going to tell you about myself. The first one is probably the most important part of this talk. I know it's hard for you to tell, but I'm Canadian and not American, which is really important to get out of the way right away. This has actually always been something that's really important to Canadians, is making sure that people understand we're not American. But for some reason, it feels more important now than it ever has before. The last thing I'm going to mention is really quickly just one of my proudest accomplishments. It's one of this link down here called Scrum Bears. Scrum Bears is a group we started, I guess it's got to be more than 10 years ago now. It started out as 4 friends sitting around, getting drunk and complaining about their jobs. Anybody ever done this? Then one day we had a friend who came and he was like, so I thought, maybe other people wanted to do this. So I put it on this new site. It was a new site at the time called Meetup. Let's see if anybody shows up. And all of a sudden people started showing up. And now we're more than 1,000 members in Gothenburg, the city I live in. Right, Canadian, but I live in Sweden. I've lived there for about 13 years. We can get into the why of that later. So now we're more than 1,000 members in Gothenburg, and we also have this spin-off conference that just happened last week called Brewing Agile. Pro tip, if you're ever going to organize a conference, don't speak at a conference like 4 days later. Not a great plan. All right, let's get into the talk. So why? Why do I think that this is a valuable talk? I don't know how many of you were here in the previous talk, but Chris talked a little bit about the Shu-Ha-Ri model, which I think is a really good model for thinking about conceptualizing learning new skills. The basic idea is there's 3 levels when you're learning a new skill, and the first one is what I want to focus on today, the Shu level. In the Shu level, what you're doing is you're emulating the behavior of others. You're basically doing repeated exercises that others have taught you to do, basically listening or following instead of, trying to invent your own things. I think that often when we come to these conferences, they're really great and they're really good at getting us pepped up. But Agile tends to be a little bit more of a philosophy than it is a practical implementation a lot of the time. And the problem with that is, where do I start? That sounds great. Teal organizations sound great. What do I actually do to do something about that? Self-organization sounds great. How? So that's what this talk is about. It's about the how, but I have to start with my standard disclaimer. These are just tools that have worked for me. I'm not claiming that these tools will work for you. I have had some of these tools be massively successful in some teams, and then I go to other teams, and they don't work at all in other teams. I'll even point one of those out when we get to it. It was one of my favorite tools, and then I took it to my new team, and I was all excited, and they were like, yeah. So I'm just giving you some stuff as inspiration is basically what we're doing here, giving you some ideas that you can try out, and I'll talk a little bit about when they make sense or when they don't make sense, but basically try them out. If they work for you, fantastic. If they don't, try something else out. So let's start with experiment-driven change. This is probably, for me, was the tool that marked the turning point in my career. When I went from being a Scrum Master who updated numbers in Jira and made sure that everybody answered the 3 questions in the morning meeting and facilitated a retrospective that nobody wanted to be at. This is the tool that helped me move away from that and really represents a big changing point in my career. So And this was shown to me, right, in the disclaimer, I should have said, I didn't invent all of these things. I've just kind of packaged them together. Sometimes I've given them cool names. Sometimes I've changed them a little bit. This is a thought, a way of thinking about retrospectives that was shown to me by a friend. So he said that, oh, that was too quick. He said that the problem with most retrospectives is that they resemble another ceremony that we're very familiar with in organizations, which he calls coffee room whining. Maybe you guys have seen this before. You know, you go, you sit down, you have a coffee with your friends, you have a little complaint about everything that's wrong in your organization. He's actually defined coffee room whining in a very specific way that I found to be really useful. So when we're doing coffee room whining, we talk about everything that's wrong in our organization. We can get out all the lists of stuff that are wrong. Then after we've got everything out on the table, we decide it is somebody else's fault. This is actually, I make it sound like a joke, but this is not unreasonable, actually. You are all responsible adults. If it was your fault, you would probably do something about it, right? It sounds silly, but you know, somebody else's fault is actually not all that unreasonable. Unfortunately, it's also not all that helpful. And then, once we finish the coffee room, once we finish blaming everybody else and listing all the things that are wrong, absolutely nothing changes as a result of the conversation we've just had. That's actually not entirely true. I've learned recently that there is one thing that changes as a result of the coffee room whining session. We are a little bit more bitter afterwards than we were before we had the thing. So there is some change, unfortunately not a positive change. And you see this in retrospectives all the time. And if this is the retrospective that you're having, it's really easy to identify. You'll list out 30 or 40 things, or maybe it's 10 or 15, depends how big your organization is. Come on in, guys. That's fine. Walk by. I don't mind. You'll list out all these things, and then you will hand that list off to a manager or to a scrum master and say, fix these things. And then you'll come back 2, 3, 4 weeks later, whatever your cadence is, and you'll do it all over again. And then you'll do that over and over and over and over and over again until finally, after 6 months, a year and a half, somebody will finally get up the courage to say, why do we keep doing this? Nothing has ever changed as a result of us having these sessions. And that's perfectly fair, because if this is the model you're following, that's exactly what's going to happen. So then he taught me that a retrospective can be viewed as the exact opposite of coffee room whining, and this is such a powerful tool. Instead of talking about absolutely everything that's wrong in our organization, we talk about one thing. We find whatever the biggest problem is that we have today. And we do this for a few reasons. One, it's just really demotivating and demoralizing to talk about absolutely everything that's wrong. But also, as you know, most problems in organizations are linked together to one another, right? One feeds the other, feeds the other. So say we talked about 20 things and we fixed the first one, well, now the other 19 might not matter anymore. So it's a lot easier, it's a lot more motivating, and it's a lot quicker to talk about one thing. Focus on the one thing we want to fix. Then we only ever talk about what we can do about it. I granted you that it is somebody else's fault. I'm not disagreeing with that. But just deciding that doesn't actually help us. So whenever we have any problem, there is one of 3 things that we can do about it. No matter what the situation is, there's always one of 3 things we can do about it. Very occasionally, not nearly as often as we like, we can fix it. It's within our realm of influence or our power, and we can do something to actually fix it. Much more frequently than that, we can find ways to minimize it. For the Americans in the room, this is not a misspelling. That's how this word is spelled. We can find ways to minimize the impact of this on us. We can put systems or procedures in place that reduce it. I mean, yeah, it would be fantastic if we didn't actually have bugs or production issues at all. But that's not something we can actually fix. But what we can do is use tools like DevOps, automated testing, checklists, these types of things to minimize the impact of this problem on us. And no matter what the problem is, no matter how it affects us, something we can always, always, always do is inform about the problem. We can bring more visibility to it. Now, I've been doing this talk a long time, and I recently learned that there is an unintended side effect of when I write inform. What I don't mean with inform is tell your manager to fix it. Inform is about visualizing, it's about bringing problems to the surface, it's about making them harder to ignore. No matter what the issue is, this is one of these 3 things is something we personally can always do. And then we talk about the experiments, specifically small changes that we are going to make that are going to have some impact on this. I've heard the word experiment used a lot of times today. It's probably not new to you, but thinking in this way is really, really important to creating change in organizations. So I live in Sweden. I don't know if anybody ever worked with the Swedes? Okay, very few. So the Swedes have this culture that's both good and bad. The Swedes don't have a lot of hierarchies, which is really nice until you need to decide something. And then it becomes a real problem. The Swedes' method of deciding something is to get everybody together and talk about it forever, so that every person gets heard, and the only way we ever make a decision is when everybody finally agrees to make the decisions. There's a lot of reasons for this. I'm not going to get into the whole Swedish psyche and what's causing it to happen, but basically this is the way they make decisions. For them, the idea of experiments is huge. Basically, instead of saying, well, I know a better way of doing this, we all say, I have absolutely no idea how to do this. Can we try something out? So we move a little bit more to, is it okay to try this out? Rather than let's make the best decision, because making the best decision can take forever. It's usually a lot quicker to make the wrong decision 50 times than it is to try to figure out what the right decision is. Especially with Swedes, because again, the ones who've worked with them will know that there's like 6 coffee breaks in a day, all of which are about 35 minutes long, and all that kind of stuff. And then they all have to go home early, and it's a big thing. Especially if it's sunny, which it rarely is. So this is actually more of a thorough breakdown of an experiment that is actually designed using this approach. So I always like to list the thing as the symptom. What is it that we're actually seeing? The one thing that's been identified during the retrospective, I write that up as a symptom. Then we talk a little bit more in open discussion about what the root cause of the thing actually is. The specifics written here are not that important. We spend a little bit more time discussing where we think this problem is coming from, what we think is causing it, and then we get very specific in the experiment that we're going to do. A very actionable thing, a very specific thing that we can do over the course of the next 2 weeks to try to impact the problem. Sometimes I like to have a success criteria, an actual follow-up interval, and this is actually, I should remove this. I don't like to use driver anymore. This is something I used to do in the beginning. Now I like to put the onus on the entire team to drive these sort of things. And I have some approaches I do for that, which are not in this presentation. But the main thing here is I don't know if this is going to solve the problem. I don't even remember this one, but it probably didn't solve the problem. All I know is it's something I can try over the course of the next 2 weeks. And if it doesn't work, I'm going to come back in 2 weeks, and I'm going to try it again. It says 4 here. So that was experiment-driven change. Appreciation flowers. Some of these tools are just going to be a little bit silly. It's nice to break it up with something a little bit less intense. Appreciation flowers are a fun little tool for retrospectives that me and a team developed. Basically, retrospectives, they can get to be a very negative place, and especially if you're in a retrospective with where you still have a lot of a blame culture, where people are saying, this person did that, and that's what resulted in it. Appreciation flowers are a great tool for that. They're super simple. You draw a little flower, and you put the person's name on it, and then you put those somewhere, and you spend a little bit of time at your retrospective saying, this is what I appreciate about the person. This is something they did in the last 2 weeks that really meant something for me. We actually got into, these are all drawn by me, and as you can see, I'm a terrible drawer. But we actually got into a little bit of an arms race in the first team I did this in. Everybody kept trying to upstage everybody else's flowers, so they were doing more and more elaborate flowers and pretty ones. But I like to share a nice little story about this. So I was working as an Agile coach. This was in a government project, and this was the team where we invented appreciation flowers. And I had a teammate who put one up there one time, and she said, it was me and the other Scrum Master's name, and she got up and she said, you know, I think we very rarely notice any of the stuff that you guys do. It seems to be completely invisible. It never comes up. But I'm pretty certain that the things you're doing are having a positive impact on us, and I wanted you to know that I noticed, which was really nice to hear. Probably should remove my ex-girlfriend's name from that slide as well, but I didn't actually notice till now it was on there. Tasty time boxes is another sort of one of these fun, just a little bit silly tools that can add a little pep. So this is a tool for the iteration itself, but it's especially a tool for the review. So, pick something tasty. It could be sweets, it could be fruit, it could be cheeses. probably shouldn't share this, but my current team is using alcohol. Name the sprints alphabetically. So the first one is apple pie, the second one is blueberry pie, the third one is cherry pie, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Oh, apparently I wrote this. Chocolate cake, that's much better. And then you eat the thing after your sprint review. You purchase whatever the item was, and you have it after your sprint review. This actually has a couple of positive benefits. Number one is it's really nice to be able to refer to sprints in the past, the time that we did that thing, and trying to remember sprint alpha 12 is not really super useful. So you end up having to describe them by the type of work that was done, or the time we had that horrible production error. It's real handy just to be able to say sprint cheesecake, and then everybody knows what you're actually talking about. This also had another really positive effect in the first team I used it in. We had invite our customers to the sprint review. So we would sit around and we would have cake and coffee with them after the sprint review and do a lot of this sort of relationship building that is so important to a successful team. I also have a theory that it was creating sort of a Pavlovian response where people got treats after doing something good, so then they felt good about doing it. I don't have any science to back this up. I just think that may have been happening. Enjoy. Bugs for breakfast. This is a tool for quality. I'm not actually advocating eating bugs for breakfast time. It's a pretty straightforward one. Have a team breakfast once a week. I just pick once a week. It could be once every 2 weeks. Say start with 1.5 hours or whatever makes sense to you. Focus on quality-related things. So you all come in, you have a little bit of breakfast, and then you sit down and you talk about quality-related issues, whether that be prioritizing the bugs, or even better, my favorite is actually fixing the bugs. Nowadays, when I do this, I try to actually build mob programming groups and sit around and actually address quality issues that we have. Maybe somebody wants to come in and do a talk on automated testing, whatever it is, focusing on quality-related issues while having breakfast. Look at error logs, improve logging, improve tooling, fix issues, create tests, anything that increases quality. Any or all of these things work great. And socialize is an important aspect of this. It's not just about the fact that we're spending time together fixing quality errors, but we're also spending time together working as a group, collaborating with each other. This is also really great if you have several teams and they don't collaborate as well together with one another because they're all off running on their own things, working on their own specific areas. This is a great tool for bringing them together and fixing those sort of cross-team things that can come up, like logging is a good example. That's usually shared between many teams. You can bring them all together at this breakfast and fix that sort of thing. I think I'm flying through this thing. You guys want to just take a break? No, I'm kidding. Pardon me. Where does the time go? A tool for data-based decisions. How many of you spend, this is such an easy one, too much time in meetings? Come on, usually everybody puts their hand up. I'm actually really impressed that not everybody put their hand up. Very often in organizations, we make statements like we spend too much time in meetings, or our quality is really bad, it's costing us a lot, or people are getting sick too often, that's costing us a lot. What we very rarely do is talk about what the actual costs of those things are. How much time do you spend in a meeting a week? Can you give me a hard number? Okay, some of you, yeah, those of you that's 40 hours a week can probably give me a hard number. But very often people actually don't have a really good concept of how much time they spend in meetings, or how much time the team spends in meetings is an even better question, right? Is your time in the meeting helping the rest of the team be successful? Very rarely do we have good data on this. And then, of course, inevitably, when somebody wants to solve it, they come up with, okay, so we're going to log everything in Jira, and we're going to write it down, and it's going to be, we're going to generate nice pie charts, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that doesn't work, because first of all, it's a huge amount of administration. It makes people really, really nervous that everything they do is going to start being tracked. So all of a sudden people are putting, fake amounts of information in there. People are moving between things too frequently to get that degree of finite information. When you start using like a real proper data gathering system, everybody's like, starts having the argument about, well, I spent 12 minutes doing that, and then I spent 14 minutes doing that, and then I went to the bathroom. Where am I supposed to log that? And you have all those kinds of discussions. So where does the time go is a really simple tool. I mean, it speaks for itself. You just throw some stuff up, And at the end of the day, every team member goes, okay, I spent 2 hours on support, I spent 3 hours on planning, I spent this many hours in meetings, so on and so forth. You combine it together as a group. This is for teams, right? So that people don't need to be nervous about being tracked and about this data being used against them. And also, really, the success of the whole team is what we're after, right? It's real simple. It takes very little time at the end of the day. But then, when we want to have this conversation about spending too many hours in meetings, we actually have hard data. We actually have real numbers that we can show people. Hard data. We have approximate data that we can show people that says our team currently spends 70% of their time in meetings, which is not producing the thing that we're trying to produce. And that's now all of a sudden a discussion of money. It's a discussion of cost, right? What meetings do we have that are non-essential? What things can we do away with? Can we make some of them more efficient? You can start having those conversations because you're actually not just complaining about the thing, you're bringing information to the people who want to have it. Event log. How many of you get to your retrospectives and cannot remember anything past the last 2 days? Not that many, but still I find this to be a very helpful tool. The event log is basically a poster that we put up in the team area. And then every day, when we have our daily stand-up, we spend 10 seconds saying what happened yesterday. And we jot little notes down about what happened yesterday. Doesn't have to be complicated, doesn't need to be intense. Yeah, see? And sometimes it can help us celebrate things. This is an actual one, I think. Yeah, sprint carrot cake. Yeah, this is an actual one. So then when we get to our retrospective, we can actually have a look back over the things that have happened in the sprint and help jog our memories about things that we might not remember that happened 2 weeks ago. I don't know about you guys, but I can't remember what happened 2 weeks ago. I barely would remember what happened 4 days ago. So it takes just a few seconds. It creates a time of group reflection. It actually makes everybody stop and think for just a moment. I've even done in teams where we talk about actual improvements. When we do this really quickly, we can throw up those experiments really quick after, there was a production outage. What do we do to make sure it doesn't happen again? That's a little bit more advanced version of it. The door calendar. So this is an interesting one. I promised you I'd tell you about one that didn't work. I used this in a team, and it was massively successful, and we were really happy with it, and it did a lot of things for us. And then I went to my next team, and I was like, great, my cool new tool, because you know how you get when you have a new tool, right? It's the thing that's going to fix everything, and you want to bang it on every problem you encounter. So I went to my next team, who was unfortunately a little less enthusiastic to have me there than my previous team was, which was not at all their fault. Share a little bit of that story, I guess. They didn't know I was coming until the day I arrived, and I was replacing people in the team who didn't want to leave the jobs and then had to go back into the team. I was completely unaware of this, so we were standing there one day, and all of a sudden there was a new guy, and he was going to work with you. He's going to fix you now. So that's a little context as to maybe why it didn't work in this instance, but it didn't work in the next team. But I still think it's a great tool. It's a very simple information radiator for when you have events that are coming. Great example. How many of you are surprised by the sprint review every single time it happens? I'll never get over this. I don't understand it. We're doing it over and over and over again. My team, even the one I have now, every time the sprint review comes, they're like, oh, I forgot to prepare. I didn't think about it. It's like, we've been doing this for 3 years, guys. I don't really understand how this sneaks up on us every time. Or, if you have regular production deployments or a lot of these types of things, even for things like office parties. The door calendar is a simple information radiator. Shows days of the week. It also shows week numbers. Swedes are real big on week numbers. It's a very odd thing. We invented dates to have precision when we speak, and they're like, no, it's too precise, but whatever. It's a little bit blurry, but we have days of the week, and the week numbers here, and then we have, it's kind of hard to read, but we have specific events listed here, like we have planning, we have review, we have retro. This represents a production deployment, and every single day we just take a few seconds and we move the today note. And everybody in the stand-up looks when we move the today note, and they go, okay, so this is today. So that when we get here, they're like, oh, the review's in 3 days. Oh, the review's in 2 days. Oh, the review's tomorrow. Maybe we should do something about that. It takes very, very little time, and then this is just a rolling thing, right? Like after 2 weeks, we just move everything up and we continue going. It takes very, very little time, but it draws attention to events for everybody. If you want, you can have a little legend, and you can have more specific, like Scrum ceremonies or days off. That's another good example. Holidays, right? How many times do we get into the middle of a sprint and we're like, oh, crap, we forgot there's 3 days off in this sprint. I don't know if you guys ever get 3 days off, but the Swedes get like 10 in a row sometimes. So, you can call attention to these things so that they're not sneaking up on you, basically. And it's a really simple tool to set up. As you can see, it's made with tape and a Sharpie and a few Post-it notes. So. Resilience map. It's a tool for cross-functionality. We're always talking about how we need to share knowledge, how teams need to be cross-functional. But then when it gets into crunch time, we are very rarely actually doing anything about that. Over and over and over again, I see teams saying, yeah, okay, Sebastian's the only one who knows about this, but we're in a rush, and he's going to have to fix it again this time, or he's going to have to fix it again next time. And we talk to our management and our leaders about how we need more time to share knowledge. But again, it's not one of those things where we're bringing data. We're just saying this is a bad thing. And we're really bad for that in IT, right? Like we say this is crap, or this is no good, or I don't think it's a good idea, or, oh, my personal favorite is that's going to be hard. We have that discussion in technical meetings all the time. What we really mean is that's going to be expensive, but we're just not using the same language, and we're not bringing information to our managers that they can understand. The resilience map is a really easy way of doing that. This picture's a little hard to see, but basically, along one side, we have different areas of expertise, different skills that we have. These could even be systems, right? Like this could be a particular database that only one person really has the knowledge to work with, or even has the credentials to work with. And then somewhere else, we have the knowledge level of various people. And then we just sort of have avatars in each area. So for instance, here, we can see that our payment system is in real trouble. Absolutely nobody knows how that works. If that breaks, we're completely screwed. This is obviously a made-up example because I've never been in a team where we have a system where nobody has any idea how it works. I'm sure they exist. But we can see that, for instance, our bootstrap knowledge is really high. Maybe that's not an area that we need to focus time and energy right now to share knowledge because we have a lot of resilience in that area. But the payment system, we're in a lot of trouble. Look, this guy's screaming about it. He's really scared. The payment system, we're in a lot of trouble. So this is a very easy information radiator. Somebody walks by your team area and they look and they're like, what does this mean? And you say, I'm so happy you asked. This means if the payment system goes down, we can't make any money and we can't fix it. You'd be pretty hard-pressed to find anybody in any organization who's not concerned about getting paid for the product that they sell. Actually, okay, I'll tell a little side story. So I used to work for the Swedish government building the, you know what, it's not important what we were building. It's actually, in the end, ended up one of the projects I'm most proud of. But before we did sort of our big rebuild and brought ourselves to a good state, we had a time when our payment system went down for 2 days. And so I'm coming from private industry, and I'm like, this is the worst thing I've ever heard. And I went to a team and I said, listen, I want to make sure that we use this as a good way to talk about why it's important to invest in quality after this incident is over. So I'd like to see if we can figure out how much this outage has cost us. And he said, what do you mean cost us? I was like, well, how much money have we lost by not doing this? And he was like, this is a monopoly, Jeff. They can't get the service anywhere else. They're just going to come back in 2 days when the payment system's back up and then buy it from it. Like, they don't have a choice. And I was like, oh, wow. That's really... But most people care about their payment systems going down. Usually, it's very important that you get paid for the product. The resilience map is a really good way of both showing the team where these possible losses are, showing the team what's important to think about, and showing the other people in the organization where you have a lot of resilience or a lack of resilience. Inline definition of done. I won't do a survey on this one, but I'm going to guess a lot of people have done this. They go to a meeting, they have this definition of done discussion. The Scrum Masters organized it, and they're like, let's get together and define a definition of done, and we make 20 criteria, and then we go back and we never ever pay attention to that list ever again. This happens Unfortunately, really, really, really frequently. You know, we make the whole list and we're like, yeah, we're going to do it, and then we completely forget about it. Maybe we put it up on the wall before we ignore it completely, but in general, you know, these things, and this has happened to me more times than it hasn't happened to me. Inline definition of done is a really simple tool. We just made task cards with the definition of done actually on the card. So when we physically move stuff across the board, we go, okay, done, 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 done. Don't need that in this case, don't need that in this case, done, 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 done. It's just a simple reminder. It's not about forcing people to do everything that's in the definition of done. Not applicable should always be an option, right? In this instance, it doesn't make sense. We don't know if this is going to be a long-lived solution, so we're not going to automate tests for it. That's perfectly fine. But when you actually visualize this, then at least you're having that conversation, which is what's usually not happening with definition of done, is you're skipping the conversation entirely. People forget that it exists. This helps us sort of remember to have those conversations and to tick them off. And at least we're standing in front of the rest of the team when we say, well, no, I didn't think it was important to have automated regression tests. And somebody goes, what? You can have that discussion. This is a new one. I'm debuting this at Agile Kaunas. This is called the safe terminal. Please note, not the safe terminal. I thought it was important to call attention to that. This is a tool for building trust. So I'll tell a little story with this one as well. I guess about 2 years ago, maybe 2.5 years ago, the current organization that I consult for decided, well, no. Before that, everything went horribly, horribly wrong. Basically, quality got pushed for so long that it became a catastrophe. Like live deleting databases on disks, catastrophe. Like we were out of space. Our product is based on data and giving data to customers. We had nowhere to store the data anymore. The data center did not have space to rack any more hard drives. We were literally out of space. People were live deleting things. Anyway, when we talked about it afterwards, we went into what we called code yellow, which I've never understood why we didn't call it code red, because it definitely was, but apparently it felt a little nicer to say code yellow. After we fixed the catastrophe of the moment, it was actually a really good event because we finally sat down and said, okay, how do we make sure this never happens again? Really? How do we make sure that our quality never gets to a point that this ever happens again? One of the things we discovered was that some people knew about this for a long time and were like quietly fixing the problem. Other people who should have been aware of it were completely unaware of it. This led us to the whole conversation around DevOps, and that we need to start having the people who build the thing, deploy it all the way to production, monitor it once it's there, and fix it when it's broken. Real easy to say, right? DevOps, just sprinkle some DevOps on it. Everything will be great. Really difficult to do. So for a long time, I'll go to the end of the story first, actually. Just 3 weeks ago, we finally sent an organization-wide email that says, planned and controlled releases are now a thing of the past. Every team in the organization is now able to release whenever they want, which is, come on, that one deserves applause. No? I thought that would have been way more popular. Anyway, we were very successful in this journey. Now the teams who actually build the software are the ones responsible to monitor it, the ones responsible to have it in production. But we struggled with this for a long time. We had our operations team and we had our development teams. And how do we hand over that responsibility was a problem we struggled with for a really long time. And there was nobody to blame for it, right? Operations, understandably, was hesitant because we had just had this thing called code yellow, once again, code red. Which they were fearful that if people got access to production, they were going to break stuff all the time and everything was going to go horribly wrong. Perfectly reasonable fear to have. And then, developers were upset because they're like, how can I actually build a steady, reliable product if I don't even have the keys to deploy things to production? I can't properly monitor them. If something goes wrong, I can't debug it. We struggled with this for a long time. And there were a lot of tools that helped to solve this. This is only one. This was a very long journey. But this was one that we couldn't even believe when we found this. It was a tool for building trust between operations and development. The big argument we were always having was, what if somebody makes a mistake? What if somebody is in production and does something that they're not supposed to do? And we were like, well, we're going to build systems for that. Yes, but those systems don't exist today. What if you forget that you're in production? What if you do the wrong thing in production? We couldn't believe when we found this. All the terminals, when you're working in production, they turn red. That's it. That's all. Terminal turns red, nobody forgets they're in production. Operations walk by, they know that you know you're in production. They also can say, hey, do you need some help? I see you're working in production over there. And they can walk over and they can, work with you and sort of, it's a really great tool for building trust. I don't think we actually do this anymore because we've kind of moved past the point where it's necessary. But this was, I think, about 2 years ago I took this picture. Just really, really simple tool to help start that conversation and help people feel a little bit more comfortable. Thank you. Morning meeting protocol. I said I was going to let you out of here early. I'm going to start going faster. How many of you have a morning meeting that goes like this? Yeah. Yesterday. What did I do yesterday? Think that everybody else is like, please. Every day we do this. Every day. We use a morning meeting protocol in many of our morning meetings. The actual text of this isn't important. In our case, we do it as a PowerPoint presentation, but it's very specifically the things that we are going through in the morning meeting. We just throw them up on a screen and we say, did any of you attend any meeting? Oh, what meetings did team members attend yesterday? Is there anything that you need to share from that meeting? What do we have today? Do you need anybody for that? Okay, great. Do we have anything that's being delayed by meetings right now? Did we have any production issues yesterday? Doesn't really matter what the specifics of this thing are. The idea is that we have a specific protocol that we're going through. How have things been for on-call? Is the Scrum board in sync? A lot of these little types of things. And we do them as PowerPoint presentations or Google Slides, rather. You can also just have it as a list on the wall, whatever it is, but it's really just a little bit of a structure in the morning meeting to make sure that people are ready to rock and roll when the time comes. WIP protocol, work in process protocol. This is an interesting one. So many people adopt Kanban. Okay, we're going to ignore the instances where they adopt Kanban and then they don't set WIP limits, which is basically not Kanban. It's just what we're calling Kanban. But very frequently what I see happen when teams adopt Kanban is they hit their work in process limit. And then they say, so what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to just sit on my hands? That'd be pretty stupid. I don't want to do that, right? There's nothing else I can do. And what do they inevitably do? They pull in some more work, right? You see very inventive solutions to this as well to make sure that the Scrum Master or whoever doesn't catch on that you're doing that. I had a team member once who came up with this one. He just did this. So then there was only one task showing on the board. It was just once you unrolled them, you realized he had 7 things in process. This is actually really reasonable, and I think that we forget a lot about people want to be doing their jobs, right? People like to be productive, they like to be accomplishing things, and the idea that just because there's an imaginary number there, I'm now supposed to completely stop working is a ridiculous one. So what we have is what we call a WIP protocol, which is what are the exact steps that we take when we hit our work in process limit before we pull in new work. Okay, yeah, I should probably have some coffee, but hey, why not? Take 5 minutes to get some coffee. The Swedes drink more coffee, I think, or second most coffee in Europe, so it's very important they do that. Then we try to unblock anything that's blocked. Then we see if someone can finish off halted work outside we work in a mob programming style, so that's relevant to us. Should we do some technology upgrades or things like that? These are, what the actual items are is not really important. This is our work in progress protocol. And then it says start something new with the team's permission. So basically, have you gone through all of these steps? Have you tried to unblock things that are blocked? Have you asked somebody if they need help? Have you done yada, yada, yada? And once you've done all that, fine. Then we'll break the limit and we'll bring something else in. This is not about making people stop working just because of an imaginary number. It's just about making sure we have that conversation beforehand, before we pull something new in so that we don't get that list of post-it notes there. This is my last one, Not Now backlog, a tool for dealing with junk. So I'm not a developer by trade, and maybe there's something I'm missing about it, but this idea of traceability and everything that we do, I've never fully understood. So I want to be really clear. This tool that I'm showing you now is not the tool I endorse. If you have a backlog that is way too long, the tool I endorse is delete all the stuff you're never ever going to look at. That's the tool I want you to use. Unfortunately, it's not the tool I've had a lot of success with implementing. I actually, working with my current product owner, he's like, I need to clean out the backlog, and we're in Jira. I said, no problem. Query anything that hasn't been updated in the last 3 months and delete it. Problem solved. And he actually did that, which is great. But if you're not in that situation, if you're in the situation where people are looking for traceability all the time, the Not Now backlog can be a really handy tool for that. Basically, decide what now means. What's our actual time horizon? Is it 3 months? Is it 6 months? Is it a year? That depends entirely on your organization, but the stuff you're actually going to get to. We all know the stuff we're never going to get to. We all know where that stuff is. I've never understood what makes us feel better about writing down bugs that we never ever intend to fix, or feature requests that we know we're never going to implement, but some people think that's important. So figure out what now means. Create a deep backlog. Don't call it the Not Now, or you can call it the Not Now backlog, the freezer box, whatever you want to call the thing. And move all the crap you're never going to do into it. It's real handy if you're in one of those really politically charged climates where people are going to get upset when you start closing things that aren't fixed. No, we didn't close it. We moved it to the freezer box or the Not Now backlog or whatever. And then forget about it. I've never opened this, ever again. I have never had an individual who was like, oh, I had to go check the Not Now backlog to find this thing. If stuff is important, it'll come back up. How many important things have you heard about once and nobody's ever mentioned to you again? No, things that are important, they come back up. People talk about them over and over again. And then, right, I said the last tool, but this is really the last tool. The one tool to rule them all, the one that makes all of these other tools work. It's really simple. Conversations. Every tool that I've showed you here are simply tools to invoke conversation amongst you and the members of your team or the other people in your organizations that are to help facilitate those conversations. If you are using these tools to never speak to each other, if you are using these tools to communicate with one another via Jira, then these things are not going to work. The idea is that these tools spawn conversations, like when I talked about the inline definition of done. It's not to force everybody to do everything all the time. It's to make sure that we're having a conversation about it at the time. It's the fix it, minimize, inform is to make sure that we're examining each of those steps and talking about what's possible in each one of them. All of these have been developed over time in teams I've worked in through a series of conversations. This is the book. I have some with me. Vidas mentioned earlier in the opening address about talking to people at the break. If you come up and talk to me, I have, I think, maybe 20 books on me and 20 more up in my room. I'll give you a free book. Please do, because they're really heavy, and I've been carrying them in my book bag all day, which is a great trick I've learned for making sure they get given away. That's it. Now we get to do that super stressful part where I live see what people thought about it. So, like the worst feedback mechanism ever.
Give applause to Jeff for a great presentation.
Thank you.
So give applause.
Thank you.
And feedback is really important for us. Please, you can send some questions to Jeff. Probably we do not have time to answer, but we can answer to one question right now. But I think we can collect those questions and we can answer later on and post on Facebook. So please just write questions.
You can also just come talk to me.
Yeah.
No questions? Great.
We'll wait a minute.
Okay.
People need to connect.
It was pretty intense speed, so.
Yeah, yeah.
What are you doing in Sweden?
I moved for a girl.
Okay, now it makes sense.
It's actually a much longer story that I'm not going to get into, but I've lived there. This is my 13th year living in Sweden, so. I'm like 1/3 Swedish at this point. Why no drivers for issues is a really great question. And this is not a thing I'm advocating all the time. I think there are different phases in a team's development. Sometimes you need to sort of put that responsibility on somebody to see those things go forward. But something I've been liking a lot more is visualizing the experiments that we're doing a lot more publicly, like putting them up with all the rest of the work, bringing them up in the stand-up every day. And the reason I don't want a specific driver is far too many times I see a experiment get stuck by one person agreeing to drive it and then getting too busy. And then as long as somebody else's face is on the thing, nobody's going to pick it up, right? They're going to leave it there forever. So I much prefer to say, okay, you drive it at the moment that you take it and move it into progress. And I do a lot more visualization. Just like you have all the boards with all of your work in Jira, or whether it be physical, I do that with the experiments as well. So they're actually at the top of any board that I work with. So they're to do like anything else.
Okay, thank you. We got a few more questions, but we will answer those later on.
Sure.
And share answers. So now you can evaluate.
I don't like this part.
Give the score.
Hey! But that's like one answer right now, right? I won't get too excited yet.
It's 29.
3 answers. Yeah, I really don't like this. It's real stressful.
You cannot see the full. It's 50.
Oh!
Yeah.
Oh, there's a 0 missing there. Oh,
Yeah.
wow. Okay. Fantastic. Thank you. Now I'm just worried, though, that they only did it because I said I was stressed about it. But whatever. That's just my imposter syndrome playing up. So,
Okay.
thanks very much, everybody.
And you can leave